Well, it's an interesting situation because actually an instinctual thing that happens inside us. They call it the fight, flight, or
Mm-hmm.
freeze, response to stress. And of course, being a kite flyer, my initial response was flight. So I instantly turned and started to run. Now, it didn't matter how many posters I'd read that week saying, don't run, stand your ground, hold your hands up and wave them in the air. It was just instinctual and a natural reaction for me to turn and run.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Intelligent Conversations podcast. Today I have the honor to learn from Jennie Milton. Jennie, also known as Adrenajen, is an Australian kitesurfing and snowkiting champion and big mountain skier. Jennie spends 3 months every year in Alaska, and she passionately promotes extreme sports and coaches others to excel and embrace the thrill of adventure. This episode with Jennie was just fascinating, to say the least. I don't want to spoil any of her story, but she shares a story about how she survived a polar bear attack, which just blew my mind. That story was, trust me, you just want to tune into that. It's not too many people can tell that story. Yeah, I don't want to spoil any of the rest of the show. Jennie was fascinating and just such a great storyteller. So without further ado, let's welcome Jennie Milton to the show. Okay, this just off the bat, I want to ask this. Polar bear attack. That initially I was like, yo, not too many people live to tell that tale. So I just have to know what the heck happened there.
All right, you want me to tear into it?
Oh, yes, please. No, it blew my mind because I know, like, I've listened to other shows and they talk about, just, survival basics. And it's like, oh, if it's a black bear, you fight. If it's a brown bear, you play dead. If it's a polar bear, well, you just better pray and hope for the best because they're terrifying. So I'm curious how you even dealt with that. That's crazy.
Sure. Well, let me backtrack a couple of steps and tell you that my first trip to Alaska, I had this bucket list of things that I wanted to do. And at the top of that list was I wanted to see polar bears in the wild. And in order to make that happen, I flew up to a place called Barrow and I found a photographer. And he was the only person that had permission to drive out onto the point in this big RV sort of
wow.
tracks on the bottom, and I went out with him for 2 days. And over those 2 days, we saw 70 polar bears. That's 70. So you can understand my accent. 70 polar bears. And it was incredible. We saw mothers with twin cubs. It was one of the best experiences of my life. It made me feel like, I had this dream come true of seeing these polar bears in the wild. And so polar bears became my spirit animal, the animal I would think of when I was doing my extreme sports, when I needed to feel that strength and that, curiosity of learning. And so the polar bear was really something special to me. So when I got the invitation to go up to teach some Inuit kids in a school how to fly kites, which is my other passion, flying kites in the wind, that opportunity was too good to pass off, especially when I went, where is Kaktovik? And I Googled it and saw that it was an island off the north coast of Alaska. And this place was famous for polar bear viewing. Now, most of the time they see the polar bears in about August, September. And at that time of the year, you can't get an airfare to Kaktovik. You can't get a hotel room because there's only one hotel and very few rooms. But I was heading up there in early May, which was not the right timing, but I was so excited that I was going to one of the places that was classified as the polar bear capital of the world, apart from Canada, right? And I had conversations with many of my friends. They're like, what are you going to do if a polar bear's chasing you while you're snow kiting? And they're like, oh, you can just jump, you can go way faster than a polar bear, you can outrun it. And we had all these hilarious scenarios of what I would do if I was snow kiting and I saw a polar bear, right? I even had one of my girlfriends, who's an artist, paint a cap for me. And she painted this cap with a polar bear on the front. So
that's
I was
cool.
Totally manifesting that I was going to have some sort of polar bear experience when I went up to Kaktovik. But when I arrived and I was being, escorted to the house that I was going to stay in for about a week with some other teachers, that was the first question I asked is, are there any polar bears around? Am I going to get to see a polar bear? And they said, unfortunately not, Jen. It's the end of winter. We haven't seen one all winter. They're out on the ice. Chances are you're not going to see one. You've got to come back in August. And I thought to myself, oh, a little disappointing, but I'll come back in August. At least this is a good chance to do what I call a recon mission, where you go and check things out first and then you go back with more knowledge and experience. And so I was just excited about being in this new place, which was a small village. And the first thing I did was put my skis on and I started skinning around the village. I still had this little bit of fear, the back of my neck standing up. I'm in a polar bear place, but I believed the locals that there were no polar bears around. And so
did you do this on your own too? Did you go out just by yourself? And that's nuts. That's
I did. I'd done my research. I'd asked questions. I'd asked those questions. I stayed close to the village, but I was like a polar bear myself. I was so curious and I wanted to explore the area, right? So I did these little mini missions around the village, and it was really cool to see how they deal with polar bears. So they had lots of posters. Everywhere I went had posters and pictures and photographs of polar bears on the wall. And I was fascinated that all the houses around the outskirts of the villages had dogs on chains outside their houses, and little dog houses. And so the dogs were living outside. And I thought to myself, oh, I hope those dogs don't end up as lunch. But apparently they call that the early warning system for polar bears, because the dogs are going to start barking if a polar bear is starting to come in their view. And so that's an alarm system for them to wake up, to be aware of that. And I was very, very glad to hear that no polar bears had ever eaten one of these dogs. And so that was
that's good.
I was very happy to hear that. But again, I was fascinated to hear all the stories from the kids who live there. They told me stories of polar bears, leaning up against their front door and they couldn't open it in the morning. Polar bears being in their garage when they went to get
that's wild.
the car out, things like this. So it was a fascinating experience to learn about their culture and learn how they live and deal with polar bears. But what happened was the wind is my best friend, and it tends to follow me wherever I go. And because I flew by plane to Kaktovik, it took 24 hours, but 24 hours later, the wind turned up and it was extremely windy. It was blowing around the 50 to 60 knot mark. That's like 80 miles an hour if we're talking American. And this was a huge storm. So it was windy, it was blowing ground blizzard, snow, and it was very difficult to see out there. And we had to spend a lot of time inside. That was not the time to be outside flying kites. Even with my experience, I can fly in very high winds. I'll fly in about 40 knots. Once it gets to 50 and 60.
No, time to cut it.
So we found some other really interesting activities to do inside the gymnasium. I was still able to teach the kids how to set up kites. I was able to have the little kids run around flying kites in the gym, and we had a really good time. I even got the janitors to get every single electric fan they could and line them up on the bleachers to see if I could create my own wind environment inside the gym to fly kites.
That's awesome. awesome.
That just shows you how passionate I am about,
Yeah.
Wind and kites and teaching others and sharing my passion with others. But after about 4 or 5 days of this extreme storm, the wind speed started to reduce. We started getting a few, blue holes in the sky. And after dinner one night, it was about nearly 11 p.m. because, of course, we're up in the Arctic where the sun doesn't set until
That's true.
midnight that time of year. So the idea came up at our discussion after dinner, let's go out and watch the sunset. It was our first chance to actually have good enough visibility to do that. And I was so excited to see the sunset at midnight. We had a couple of dogs with us that they had been teaching the kids how to do ski juring, being towed with the dogs with cross-country skis on. So it was important to take them for a walk. We were going to see the sunset. And at the last minute, one of them said, "Hey, Jen, grab one of your kites. Let's fly that thing." And so I grabbed my kite and we started walking around the village to the leeward side, which is like the downwind side of the village, which isn't actually the best place to fly a kite because it tends to be the most turbulent wind when there's buildings upwind of you. But I thought, okay, we'll give it a go. And so when we got there, I launched the kite and the kite was going up and down and swirling around because of that turbulent wind. And the other people I was with kind of backed up closer to the building behind us to get out of that wind. And the next thing I know, I hear one of the girls yell, "Bear, bear." And I look over, and over this snowbank, over the rise, was a polar bear charging directly at me.
Oh my gosh. What was your first thoughts there? Like that, I think I would probably panic at first. I'd be like frozen, like what's going on here?
Well, it's an interesting situation because it's actually an instinctual thing that happens inside us. They call it the fight, flight, or freeze, response to stress. And of course, being a kite flyer, my initial response was flight. So I instantly turned and started to run. Now, it didn't matter how many posters I'd read that week saying, "Don't run, stand your ground, hold your hands up and wave them in the air." It was just instinctual and a natural reaction for me to turn and run. And it gave me great comfort to see the other people running as well. We'd all had the same response. But unfortunately, I was the one at the back and closest to that polar bear.
Oh, man.
So the next thing that happened as I was running was, out of the blue, I fell flat on my face and I didn't really know why I had fallen over. Now, it could have been, looking back at it, it could have been that I was wearing my Aussie Ugg boots underneath these over boots, and so I wasn't exactly in my running shoes or my skis.
Yeah.
None of those scenarios that we had come up with of me outrunning the bear because I was on my skis, that was out the window. I'm now face first, flat on the ground and not moving at all as that bear was still running at full speed towards me. At that point, I got up to my feet and I turned around and I looked at the bear. I wanted to see how far away it was, and it was still running at full speed towards me. I remember looking in its eyes. We were looking directly at each other, and I remember the feet of the bear. And if you've ever seen it on the National Geographic channel, they have this really unique kind of floppy feet run, but they are going fast, and it is now gaining ground and way too close already. So my kite had about 20-meter lines on it. Hopefully, Josh, you can convert that for our
Yeah, I got that. I ran track and field, so I know how far, meters, yards. Yeah, I got it all. So
So the bear is now getting really close to my kite. So I'm going to guess that it's about 30 meters away. And I realized at that point in time that I was still attached to the kite. I had my safety leash on. Now, when we're kiting, we always have a leash so that if we let go of the bar of the kite, which I had done, we're still attached to it so it doesn't just blow away and you have to run endlessly downwind to go and catch it, right?
Yeah.
And so I had this Velcro wrist leash on. It was a trainer kite, and I was trying to get this Velcro undone and off my wrist over the big ski mitt that I had on and try to get that off, which seemed like it took forever. It was like everything was going in slow motion at that point. And I was trying to get the wrist leash off. I was also thinking in my head, oh my gosh, Jenny, this could be it. Your demise could be from a polar bear attacking you. And I also thought to myself, I don't have a weapon. I don't have anything with me to protect myself except the bar on my kite, which was now a couple of meters away from me because I'd let go of it. So again, that wasn't just in my hand ready. At that point, I realized that the bear is now closer to me than my kite. So it's way too close, and I could see no real solution to getting away from this bear except get that wrist leash off, which I did. The wrist leash came off and I let go of the kite. And at that point, the wind blew my kite away from me and the polar bear turned and chased the kite.
No way. Wow. My goodness.
So at that point in time, I realized that the wind and the kite had now saved my life, and I had the chance to continue running away and getting away from that bear. I ran away from it, and I'm yelling, polar bear, just like I'd been trained to yell avalanche, avalanche when I'm in the backcountry. And at that point, somebody, a native guy, came out of the building, and he's like, what happened? I said, a polar bear charged me, and he jumped on his phone and called Polar Bear Patrol. Now, that's a couple of guys that have a snow machine. In the lower 48, they call it a snowmobile, right? And normally they are patrolling the village, and they have two guns in the back, one which has fireworks and one which has bullets. And by the time they got there, the bear was not threatening my life, and I was so stoked to see them firing fireworks at it, and it ran out of the village. And I was so grateful that I had survived this experience, but also the polar bear. You know, the last thing I wanted to see happen was a polar bear be shot because of me. It also made me realize that the polar bear was curious. I don't think he was like, hey, there's a tasty Aussie girl. I'm going to eat her. I'm hungry. I really believe that he had seen the kite from a distance going up and down, had gotten curious, and had wanted to see what that was. Was it a seal? What was it? A bird that had, died and landed on the ground or something like that? So as soon as he saw the kite moving, that was what he was more interested in than me, and he turned and chased that kite. And I live to share the story, Josh.
Oh my gosh. That's wild. I gotta say, glad you're here to tell the tale. That's a really good story. Not too many people can say that. And on the topic of the polar bears being curious, I have to, like, my first thought was like, yeah, well, there's not that much out there. It's just empty whiteness. I mean, I haven't traveled there, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm sure there's not that many entertaining things. So also it's right, like what you said, they see this kite in the sky. It's like, what? That's not normal, right? And just let's go check it out. And
yeah, the kite was a dark blue color. So there was a lot of contrast between the white snow and white sky and the dark kite. There are boats out there which are kind of frozen in the ice that the fishermen take out in the summertime once it's melted. There's a big dumping ground where the village dumps all of its rubbish so that the polar bears are attracted to the garbage dump rather than attracted to the bins in the village. And so that would have been a place where they might have been hanging out. But I really believe that they saw that kite from a distance. We were also upwind of the bear, and so they would have been able to smell us. They would have smelt the dogs that we had with them as well. So they had a few of their senses going, I'm sure. And when we looked back through some of our photographs that we took before the polar bear experience, we actually saw the bear peering over a snowbank. You could see it's
No way.
no, so it was watching us for
you better
quite a while.
frame that image right there. Frame it, put it right there. Just
Yeah, and the next day, when we had a lot of debriefing to do in our group, and there were some tears. I'm telling you, there were tears. And the next day, I was greeted at the school by all of these kids running up to me and giving me a huge hug. The news had spread like wildfire in Australia, and all of these kids were so grateful that I was still with us. And again, they started telling me all these stories, and I was lucky enough to be able to teach them in some of their classes. I'm also a certified drone pilot, and I had my drone with me, and I was able to discuss with the kids using drones for polar bear patrol, and we were able to discuss some of the ways that we could prevent this happening in the future. So it really was some added information, because polar bear attacks and charges are not that common, and anytime a polar bear does react with a human, it is some really great information to scientists and to the community that we can learn from in order to live a happy, healthy.
I didn't know that. That's cool.
So that is really a cool situation. So I always believe out of every negative, although this wasn't a negative situation for me, I treasure that story and experience. There's always some positive and some learning moments that can come out of that. So
I'm just curious, what would you say was the learning moment? What did you say you'd take away from that story?
Boy, there's quite a few. I think one of the things that I learned was about our fight, flight, freeze, stress response. And no matter how much you plan of preparation of how you think you're going to respond in a situation, you really don't know how you're going to respond until it actually happens. I think we can learn a lesson of being aware that our climate is changing, and I believe that with the climate change and the global warming, those polar bears are not in their natural habitat. They should have been out on the ice, but we did some research, and the ice was actually away from the shore at that point of time, which means the polar bears were unusually on the land when they should have been out on the ice. And so we can't really take any of our dates of weather and where the animals are going to be for granted. Everything is changing, and we can see that in the news every day of our weather changing in our environment. So it's definitely something to be aware of, and this was another obvious experience and situation that is showing us that our environment and our weather is changing.
And it's so true, right? Because I can say most people don't travel right up to the northern parts of Alaska, right? So they don't physically get to see kind of what's going on. And it's cool that you shared that and said, like, usually you can't really see the effects until you go to like the point of where it's happening. And man, so I'm just curious, this is just popped in my head. How do you get into kite? So kind of explain how that works to me, because I did a little bit of research, and are you just on skis and then you have a kite just throwing you around? Is that kind of the gist of it?
Well, hopefully it's not throwing me around. I like to think that it's towing me smoothly wherever I want to go. But I learned to fly kites in my 20s. My brother and my best friend gifted me a kite for my birthday one year, and I got into flying kites. And it gave me so much joy because my dad had taught me to sail at a young age. And so it was very similar to sailing, flying a kite, and you're out there in the wind and the weather and it gets you outside. So as soon as I saw kiteboarding, which hopefully, Josh, you've seen some kiteboarding out on the water.
I have not. So I live in Utah, so I see snowboarding and skiing, and I actually do snowboard, but we don't see kites. So like that whole concept to me, I'm like, yo, like that sounds insane.
Do some Googling of kiteboarding and kite surfing, but it's been around since the late 90s, early 2000s is when we started seeing kiteboarders using a kite with a twin tip board, which is very much like a wakeboard if you're going water skiing or wakeboarding. And that kite tows us around on the water for us to essentially, it's very similar to snowboarding. We're out there carving turns, doing jumps, having a great fun using water as a surface instead of snow. And you can also use those kites with a surfboard in order to get towed out through the waves and then choose a wave and surf it back in. That's called kite surfing. And so I started getting into the kiteboarding and kite surfing aspect of the sport, but I grew up skiing. My brother and I have been skiing since we were 2 years old, and my mum and dad had a ski shop, and I actually owned one of the first snowboard stores in Australia.
Oh, that's so cool.
For all the listeners out there, yes, we have snow in Australia. And we have about 12 ski resorts, and we have snow from June until October. So it is nearly ski season in the Southern Hemisphere.
That's just so foreign to me because I live in the Northern Hemisphere. And I just, when you say June to October, I'm like, oh, that's kind of a, like, just because our season's like probably November to February or March. This year was actually pretty good. We got quite a bit of snow, but man, I didn't know, because I guess from the pictures I see online, Australia is just this barren desert that has kangaroos and I mean, and like koalas, and I didn't know that there was snow. So like what region of Australia has like the snow and stuff? Because I know like the outback's on the east side, right? Is it?
Yeah, we're very literal in Australia. So, of course, you have the outback, which is way out, and then we have the snowy mountains, which are very snowy. So the snowy mountains are in New South Wales and Victoria. So those mountains cover two different states. Our highest peak is called Mount Kosciuszko, and it is in New South Wales, and that's our highest peak. And so it has snow on it. It'll have snow on it already. So probably from about April and sometimes even till December, you will find snow on Mount Kosciuszko at high altitude. As you come down the mountains, suddenly you start hitting those ski resorts where you'll see snow from June until October. And Aussies love to ski. We absolutely love to go skiing and snowboarding, and there are about 50,000, 60,000 of us at my last statistic that I read of us traveling overseas to go skiing and snowboarding in the Northern Hemisphere winter. And that was what I was doing. I was actually planning to go heliboarding in Alaska, my dream trip. And I went up there to go heliboarding. And again, that's an incredible story of my first run down this big mountain peak. And that was another dream coming true. But what I realized was when you go to Alaska, and you might be going there for about a week or 10 days in order to make sure you get the good conditions to make that dream come true. I realized that there are days when the helicopters can't fly. It's stormy and it's windy. And I had a trainer kite with me, and because I was still enjoying practicing flying the kites, and I'd planned to go to Hawaii to have a kiteboarding lesson, because back then in the early 2000s there were very few places you could go and get a lesson to learn. And one of the heli ski guides was a windsurfer, and in a discussion he'd said, I've got to train a kite too. And so the first stormy day when the helicopters couldn't fly, he and I went out to the airstrip, this flat snowy area, and we started flying our kites and seeing if we could get towed around with our snowboards on. And that was the first time that both of us really discovered that snow kiting was a thing, that we could get towed around with a kite, with a snowboard as well. And that experience there are a lot of crashing and a lot of
sure.
moments in that session. But I fell in love with this idea that I could get towed around the mountains with a kite. And I also fell in love with that heli ski guide. And he is my husband today of 16 years now. So
awesome. Congratulations. That's awesome.
Tells you why I've kept going back up to Alaska every year now. For 23 years I've been going up to Alaska and still making my dreams come true. It's endless up there. Yeah. So
how does with the kiting, this is one question I have. How does it work with trees? Like, if there are any, like when you're going around the mountains, like if there's trees in the way, how do you kind of maneuver around those?
Good question. And that comes into choosing the right location to do this particular sport. And especially when you're learning, if there are trees around, it's not a good spot to go snow kiting. You want to get above tree line, and that's why Alaska is such a great place to do it. In Australia, up on Mount Kosciuszko and in the national park there is also above tree line. That's another great spot to do it. You're in Utah, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so Salt Lake City has some great locations up at Skyline, Strawberry Reservoir near you. So people started going out on frozen lakes that were covered with snow. Above tree line is definitely the better place to go. That's not to say some of us advanced kiters don't go through the trees occasionally, but we have those skills to evaluate what the wind is doing around the trees, and also the skills to keep our kite in the sky. So you want to choose your location.
Beginners go out like on the ice and like above tree line to make sure, you can get the hang of it. And then, as you get more comfortable, I mean, it's right. Like, it's like snowboarding, right? As you get more and more comfortable, you might try riskier and riskier things, right? Let's try this jump. When you're first learning, you're like, dude, I'm just trying to stay up on this board, and nothing else. But as you get more and more confidence, then try new things.
Exactly right. That's exactly right. And I love to tell people who are fascinated with snow kiting and maybe wanting to get into it, that there's really three parts to the sport. There's the snowboard and the ski skills, which you want to go to the resort and get your skills up to an intermediate to advanced level. Then you want to do some kite flying and get a kite lesson. And you can either go to a kiteboarding school and get that, or there's actually some great snow kite schools around. I teach myself in Idaho, Montana, Alaska, and Australia. There's also a snow kiting school out of Park City near you, Josh.
Oh, so there you go.
Book in with my friend Jake next winter and give snow kiting a try. So I mentioned ski and snowboard skills. I've mentioned kite skills, but the third skill set that we really want to start also learning is our backcountry skills. So going and doing an avalanche course, learning what we need to carry in our backpack in order to be safe out in the mountain, because we don't have ski patrol looking after us if we fall over and hurt our knee or hurt ourselves. So it's like backcountry skiing and snowboarding, or splitboarding, as most of you guys are doing these days, and learning those skills of forecasting the right weather of when we should be out there, choosing the right location like we talked about. Once we get to the location, being very observant and looking around, is there any signs of avalanche danger? Is that frozen lake you're going on, is the ice thick enough to take our body weight? Are there any polar bears in the area?
Yeah.
These are all the observations you need to do. And of course, also evaluating the weather. That's one of the things that I teach my students is the word flow: forecast, location, observation, and weather, so that you're constantly checking those things in order to be safe.
And that, I mean, especially with, I mean, this sport, I imagine is very high adrenaline and just this euphoric high, but you also, like you said, you want to be safe, and you know, there's rules to it. And on that though, I have this question: how do you, I guess, talk yourself into, like, because you said you were jumping between mountains, like when you're doing this at times, how do you work up the courage to be like, all right, we're jumping off this like cliff, like that's crazy.
Now, this is a great question, Josh, and it's something I think about all the time. And in fact, you've already mentioned it yourself. It's something that you need to build up your skills, build up your experience, so that you get to a level where you feel comfortable doing those things. That's not doing big jumps or gliding over a cliff is not something you want to be doing when you're learning. That's something that you build up to. And I really believe that overcoming fears, no matter whether it's in daily life, the fears that we have with, getting sick and illnesses, or the fear of going live on a podcast,
Yeah.
or the fear of dropping into a big mountain. If we start exposing ourselves to those fears and we can find the courage to take the next step forward and overcome that fear, all of a sudden our fear tolerance is starting to build up, and we start feeling more comfortable as we have those skills and those experiences. I recommend making sure you're getting the training from professionals. Go and do an avalanche course. Go and get a kite lesson. Go and get a ski instructor, a snowboard instructor. Even if you think you're pretty good,
You're not.
and so being open to learning, even, at an older age or at an advanced level, and going and finding somebody to give you some of those tips to keep you safe. It's all about being safe so that we can start doing some of these maybe scarier things, but also surviving to live the tale. And I like to call it my fear cocktail. We're going to have a bit of a fear at the top of the mountain, right? And you want to run away. And if you have too much fear in your glass, you're going to want to turn and run, call that helicopter back, come and get me, take me down. Or you can add a little bit of adrenaline. And that is also a natural body response that we're going to have when we're in a fearful situation in order to find courage. They don't call me Adrenajen for nothing. Because
how'd you come by that nickname?
I wonder why. I wonder why. That was a nickname that my brother came up with me at a young age. I've been into extreme sports most of my life, and he started calling me Adrenajen at a young age, and it's just stuck. And so once we have that adrenaline in our body, that gives us the courage to face our fear. But that adrenaline also is a stress response for us to be safe and for us to make the right decision of going to
what to do
rather than danger. And I've found that that combination of fear, courage, and adrenaline has allowed me to have some incredible experiences in life. But again, I'm still here to tell the tale and share my stories with others.
That's so cool. Well, Jennie, I really hate to end this conversation, and just it's been fascinating. And I mean, you have great stories and you're a great storyteller. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you teach some of these courses, some of these like avalanche safety, all that you were talking about. What's the best way that people can find you, reach out to you, all that fun stuff, if they would like to get into this sport?
Sure. I love sharing my passion. I love coaching and teaching others. And you can get hold of me on my website, which is adrenajen.com. You can also find me on YouTube at Adrenajen. And there's some great instructional videos on my YouTube channel that you can start looking at to building that knowledge. There's a lot of knowledge that we can build in the classroom, in theory, before you actually get out on the mountain. Once you get out on the mountain, I'm going to teach you how to fly a kite. And it's always my goals and the students' goal to get your first rides with skis and snowboard and the kite in your first lesson. So it's going to be a fun time when you get to come out with me. But you wanted to actually start your learning experience now, even during the summer, of getting the safety, avalanche safety, some of the kite theory in, understanding wind and weather, and building those skills. So Adrenajen is ADRENA. Jen, Jen, and I hope I get to meet some of you. Josh, come out with me next winter. I'd love to take you snow kiting.
Oh, it's tempting. I will say, I really want to. Like you, I tend to chase that adrenaline, that risky. I mean, other people view it as risky, but I don't know. That's something I enjoy, Che.
The other thing, if you've enjoyed some of my stories, and maybe you're not a skier or a snowboarder, but you love my stories, and hopefully they've inspired you and motivated you, I actually do some public speaking. So if anybody wants to have me come and talk at an event for their business or their team or something like that, I would love to come and speak with you. And I'm also in the middle of writing a children's book to share
awesome.
some of these lessons at a young age. We can start learning to overcome our fears. And I've got some great stories to tell from younger years with my brother. So I hope there's a story out there for everybody.
Please let me know when that drops. I'll be happy to have you on again, talk about it, and just share some of that stuff, because you're fascinating. You're so many cool things to learn there, and just awesome stories. But thank you, Jennie, for coming on. All right, everyone, as you can tell, that is Jennie Milton. She's a very intelligent person, has great things to share. I challenge you guys, if you are interested in learning more about kite surfing and snow kiting, to reach out to her. I'm sure she would love to help you out. You also can check out the links and her YouTube channel if you are interested in just, learning a little bit more about what snow kiting is. Stay tuned till next week. We have a great guest lined up for you guys. See you guys next week, and let's get after it.
Hey everyone, if you liked this episode and would like to hear more, be sure to hit that subscribe or follow button. We release a new episode every Wednesday for you guys to listen to. Thank you guys so much for the support that you give. We could not have done this without you guys. If you would like to be a potential guest on the show, check out intelligentconvos.com and fill out the form there. Thank you guys again, and let's get after it.